So, we now come to the other famous masterpiece, which was going on at this time, painted by Raffaello, the great rival of Michelangelo. There are four so-called rooms of Raffaello. We say so-called because of those four rooms, Raffaello himself, by himself, only painted two. The other two were painted shortly before or after his death by his school, his apprentices. And we are only going to focus on the very first room that Raffaello painted, technically referred to in Italian as the Segnatura Apostolica, that is, the apostolic signatory, loosely translated, and for all intents and purposes, this was the Pope's private office room, his private library, where any head of state coming to the Vatican to have an intimate private meeting, audience with the Pope would do so. We said that Pope Julius II gave carte blanche to Michelangelo. Not even the Pope knew what Michelangelo would wind up painting in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. In this case, Pope Julius II put his hand into it. That is to say, he gave Raphael at least the major overarching themes, propaganda, that he wanted Raffaello to incorporate. Raffaello paints this room between 1508 and 1512, while Michelangelo is painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And between the two commissions at the time, the much more important and desirable commission was not the Sistine Chapel. It was this room, which is why Raffaello got the job, because he was the up-and-coming chief architect of the Vatican, of the Pope. The reason why this room was most important, or more important, is, as I said, because it would wind up becoming the Pope's private, most intimate office, meeting place, library, especially to have very delicate meetings with heads of state coming to meet him in the Vatican. For example, it was in this room in the year 1534, the year Michelangelo was commissioned to paint the altarpiece in the Sistine Chapel, which we'll come to in the next lecture session. It's in this room that the Pope formally excommunicates the Catholic priest Martin Luther and the King of England, Henry VIII, which we're also going to come to in the future lecture session. So kind of an important place historically. The first wall that Raffaello paints a fresco in this room is the first Pope that would hit Your Highness, Your Majesty, as you're entering into this chamber. And again, it's the first image that students, dear students, you have on your worksheets. Also those others who are joining us that perhaps do not have worksheets, but are following us nonetheless, I've provided the link for this Vatican Museum's virtual tour that you can find on your own. If you're using a link, then when you open it, go through the door to the right, and you will be in the correct room, the Segnatura Apostolica that we're talking about. And as soon as you're in that room, immediately turn left and look at that first wall, that first panel. which art historians once again have incorrectly titled the disputatio in Latin, the disputation. Disputation, meaning debate, argument, disagreement. Disagreement about what? Disagreement about the optical center's focal point in this panel, in this wall. That little white dot you see in what looks like a big candlestick on top of an altar, which is supposed to be a monstrance, it's called. It's not a candlestick. It's called technically a monstrance, from the Latin term monstrare, to demonstrate or to show what's encased or inside, namely that white circular object, the Eucharist, which in Roman Catholic theology, Christian theology, believes to be what hosts Jesus Christ incarnate, albeit under the form of unleavened bread. And the idea for this title, erroneous title, the disputation, is that all of the characters you see surrounding this in the scene are somehow disputing or arguing about or debating the Roman Catholic, not only doctrine, but dogma, that is something that you must believe if you're a Roman Catholic, regarding the Eucharist, that it is actually Jesus Christ incarnate, fully divine, God, and human, meaning also not just soul, mind, spirit, but human flesh and blood, somehow miraculously contained in this wafer of unleavened bread. Pope Julius II in 1508 had no doubts as to what the Roman Catholic Church's position was on this matter. So these characters you see then in the background, in coming into the foreground, they're not debating, they're not arguing, they're not disputing, hence the erroneous title, disputatio, the disputation, about the Eucharist, about the Blessed Sacrament. No, it's something much different. On the contrary, what they're supposed to represent is the Ecclesia Cattolica, the one worldwide political assembly, the Catholic Church of Christ, not in disputation or disagreement, sed contra, on the contrary, in communio, in communion with each other, which leads us then to basically two levels. If you look at this panel, if you just kind of cut it horizontally in half, the upper half, the divine. And you'll notice at the very top, you see a bearded guy with his middle index fingers over his lips, holding in his left hand a sphere, perfect sphere, symbol of the divine itself, kind of a mortarboard behind his head. And in the background behind him, you see a very large gold-colored circle, which actually disappears behind the wall, the arch of the wall. This is supposed to be, in Christian theology, the first person of the Trinity, God the Father. Now, we can actually, using basic geometry, calculate how big this sphere actually is. But symbolically, the reason why it disappears is because even the church itself, even the Pope, as much as we can know about the divine or the God, ultimately in itself, the divine remains ineffable, not completely knowable in itself. Okay, so God the Father. Therefore, if humans are humans and not divine, we've covered this already, but it bears repeating, the divine must if it wants humans to know the divine must reveal itself. How does it do that? The next figure down, you see Jesus Christ. He's kind of doing the jazz hands, right? And you see a smaller golden sphere behind him as well. So divine incarnation, divine on earth. How does that process happen in Christian and specifically Trinitarian theology? By the power of, through the third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, symbolized by that white dove in the very smallest gold circle just down below. That's how it happened the first time, when the Archangel Gabriel announced to Mary that she would be the mother of Yeshua, Jesus, God saves, the mother of God, Theotokos. And that's how it happens every other time when the Eucharist is celebrated, confected. The divine incarnation happens once again during that ritual celebration of the Eucharist in the host, which is therefore why you see it directly beneath God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit, and bam, the Eucharist right on the altar. Okay. Also, those figures you see sitting on the cloud bank, like a stadium seating, like the Colosseum, these are various major figures from the Old and New Testaments. So you'll see, starting on the far left, you see Simon Peter holding the keys. On the far right, you see Paul holding the sword. Again, he was decapitated, so that's why he holds the sword. Also, you see other figures. You see King David, King Solomon, etc. So, communio, communion of this worldwide political assembly of Christ in heaven. Beneath that cloud bank, the lower portion, the lower half of the panel, then, you don't see a bunch of philosophers, theologians arguing, debating. You see them in communio as well, discussing, relating with each other, speaking with each other, listening to each other, talking about all of these great divine heavenly mysteries. Look at the lower left corner of this panel, and you will see a woman dressed in a gold and blue garment. Gold and blue. Remember the beginning of the course, the symbolism of gold, the sun, the divine. Blue, water, also the divine. You'll notice that she is the only figure in the entire panel who's actually looking out at us. Everyone else is engaged somehow with each other, among each other. She is the only one, the only figure actually, you would say at first, not engaged. No, she is engaged. She's engaging us to engage this composition. This panel, dressed in gold and blue, symbol of the divine, this is supposed to be an allegory of divine wisdom. So divine wisdom is engaging us to engage the composition, what you're looking at. And you'll notice divine wisdom is gesturing us with her hand, pointing towards that very same host, Eucharist, and the monstrance on the altar, reminding us that the ultimate reality of everything, not just God or the divine, but the divine incarnate, is right there. And it remains here when this worldwide political assembly of Christ, the Catholic Church, is in communio, in communion. Consequently, you see just to the side of the altar, on the right side of the altar as you're looking at it, another little old-looking dude with a big white beard pointing up, directing our gaze to the upper portion, the heavens, the divine in itself. The Eucharist is the vehicle in this world, still temporal, earthly world, that Jesus Christ has left to help, to assist human beings in this daily trudging along eking out our existence to ultimately help us get to the ultimate goal, namely, not just communio, communion here, but eternal divine communion forever and ever with God. Okay. I hope that's clear enough. In any event, remember I said this room that we're looking at, the Segnatura Apostolica, this is the first wall in that room, the Pope's private office room, where Your Majesty is coming to have a private audience with the Pope. This is the first thing that hits you. In other words, propaganda. Your Majesty, remember what your ultimate destiny is. Remember what the destiny is of all of your subjects over whom you rule, over whom you exercise absolute authority and power. It's the same for everyone. Eternal divine life with the divine itself, God. Fortunately, that was revealed to us through Jesus Christ, who 40 days after the resurrection ascended into heaven. He's not been back in a while. We don't know when we're expecting him. But of course, he's left us one in his place. Rock. Peter. Successor of Peter, the Pope, to whom Your Majesty is now going to turn left and formally meet. And that brings us to the second panel. This is the panel which is directly behind the Pope in this office. So the Pope is at his desk in front of this wall. This wall is referred to as the four cardinal virtues. The four cardinal virtues. Cardinal. It comes from the Latin term cardinalis, meaning most important, like cardinal numerals, the most important numbers in the number system. Cardinal virtue, the cardinals are the most important members of the worldwide political assembly of Christ, the Catholic Church, to elect the Pope. The cardinal virtues are the most important human virtues to assist one in living at least a decent human life, if not aiding one in living the fulfillment of that human life, that is divine human life, divine incarnation. Okay, 4 cardinal virtues, and we see that depicted here. To begin with, again, the link for those of you on your worksheets is below. If you want to zoom in on this, just click on that link and you can zoom in as you follow through. Otherwise, before we get to the cardinal virtues themselves, you'll notice, looking at the window, so the Pope's desk would have been in front of that. On the left side and the right side. On the left side, we have something I mentioned much earlier on in a previous lecture, the consolidation of ancient Roman law, civil law, Codex Iuris Civilis, the Code of Civil Law, under Emperor Justinian I in the year 553, at the time of the Second Council of Constantinople. And so you see Justinian, notice he's dressed in gold and blue, de jure divino, divine right of kings. He's sitting there about to receive this code of law. On the other side, the right side, you see Pope Innocent III, whom we've also spoken about, 13th century, 1200s, receiving the code, the Codex Iuris Canonicis, or the Code of Canon Law, from its more famous proponent in the 1200s, a guy named Gratianus, Gratian, we say. Okay. So you see both civil law and church law on either side of the Pope, who's seated there in the middle. And that brings us then to these 4 cardinal virtues. So if you look above the window, you see 3 women seated And they're all in different positions and doing kind of different things. Let's start with the first one, right in the middle. What do you see? You see this woman. She is looking at a reflection of herself in a mirror. Moreover, you'll notice that on the back side of the woman's head, there is the face of an old man looking in the opposite direction. And if you look in the mirror, you'll notice that the image in the mirror is not that younger, fresher face of the woman. Rather, it's the face of that same older looking bearded man behind her. This is first of all, recalling of the ancient Roman god Janus, from which we get the word January, the first month of the year, Janus, which is always depicted in ancient Rome as, on the one side, a younger looking face looking towards the future, and an older looking face on the back half looking towards the past. This woman is supposed to represent the first cardinal virtue, the virtue of prudence. Remember, Your Majesty, you've just entered this room. You're about to talk with this guy, the Pope. Now you're looking at this image above your head. First of all, you're looking at the virtue of prudence. Your Majesty, divine right of kings, de jure divino. God has ordained that you are sovereign ruler in your realm. You possess absolute power and authority. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, Your Majesty, make sure that you make a daily examination of your conscience. Look in the mirror at yourself every day and make sure that your words correspond to your deeds. Otherwise, at least on a human level, your subjects may give you a bit of trouble. The virtue of prudence. Second cardinal virtue, temperance, which leads us to the woman on the right side. You'll notice that she is holding the reins and the bridle of a horse, as in horse power. You'll notice she's not even so much as holding them. It's almost as if she wants to throw them away. She's loosely, at the best, loosely holding them, and she's looking away. She's not even looking at them. The virtue of temperance. Once again, Your Majesty, you enjoy absolute power and authority. Power and authority very quickly go to the head. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, Your Majesty, remember, you should behave every day as if you did not even have such absolute power and authority. You need to be temperate, balanced. The virtue of temperance. Third cardinal virtue, the left side, the third woman. You'll notice that she is with her right hand, the right hand of power, she's gripping the trunk of a sapling. That's interesting, it's a sapling. Of an oak tree, a sturdy oak. You know it's an oak tree because you can actually see the acorns and the shape of the leaves. Okay. And with her left hand, she is actually petting the head of a lion, or maybe even a lioness. The virtue of fortitude. fortitude, strength, like the mighty oak. Your Highness, once again, you possess absolute authority, power. Real authority and power is not lording it over your subjects so that they obey you out of fear. Rather, real possession of power and authority is dealing in such a way that your strength comes from elsewhere, the oak, tree, the divine, and that you wield it. You wield your power and authority in such a way that even a lion, the king of the jungle, would allow itself, would actually perhaps ask for itself to be petted by you. The virtue of fortitude, that is what real strength is. We said there are 4 cardinal virtues. Where's the 4th cardinal virtue? It's not depicted here. Nope. Why? Because it's why your majesty is coming here. You want the 4th cardinal virtue. You presumably are supposedly practicing it every day already in your realm, in your kingdom. That is, you have come here to meet with the Pope because you want an annulment, you want some sort of economic benefit, you want a military treaty, a military alliance, whatever. You want justice. And justice is not depicted because it's sitting here before you in the person of the Pope. Wow. Unbelievable. Okay. That leads us then to the 3rd wall, which Raffaello decorates. The 3rd wall, which is what the Pope is looking at. So by this point, your Majesty, you're making your case to the Pope. He's probably fallen asleep by this point. When he wakes up, what's he looking at? He's looking, he's pretending to look at your Majesty, but he's actually looking behind your Majesty at the opposite wall, the 3rd wall that Raffaello paints, which is called the Parnassus, and to which we turn now.